Tonight on Free Minds TV, we'll be talking about drastic budget-cutting measures in the United Kingdom. We'll also be discussing a sandwich from the north of the U.S. border and an enchilada from the south. Plus, we'll be getting into how the new healthcare law is already affecting some American workers. That plus a whole lot more tonight on Free Minds TV.
Welcome to episode 179 of Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. As always, it is Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Nick, we've got a lot to talk about today. We're going to be primarily focusing on, well, various parts of the world. We've got a few news stories, a couple, from other parts of the world before coming into the United States.
Well, three of them are from North America, so they're pretty close to home, even though
it's not American.
we only have one American story today.
But it is important to cover these other parts of the world. We do have viewers in other parts of the world, and plus these measures, they do affect us as well. Governments tend to copy each other, at least Western governments.
Well, it would be nice if they did in this case.
In this case, amazingly enough, Nick, I think this is the first time we're going to be pointing out some positives in the UK. It's coming from a whole lot of negative, I'm assuming. I haven't heard the story, but I'm just guessing. Big budget cuts going on in the UK. We're also going to be discussing food and sandwiches. Some really good news on giant food being created. We've always got a report on these stories.
We're talking about big sandwiches.
Big sandwiches, and we've got...
Because we're an intellectual show.
That's right. Down in Mexico, they've created a gigantic sandwich. And they're celebrating it. Meanwhile, north of the border, their sandwiches are so filled with calories that the government may be stepping in and banning them. We'll be getting into that. But first, let's start out with some good news in the UK. It's the first time. This is
well, I think we've done a couple
shows, Nick.
We've done a couple good news articles, but they haven't
not
been
from the
big.
UK though.
No, we've done a couple.
I don't know.
They haven't been big good news from the UK.
I don't know. I'm pretty sure this is the first one I remember. The first time I'm saying this is some real positive stuff coming out of the United Kingdom. So I'll email us if you know.
They're doing better than us in this instance, and this is something that will not be happening, if I had to guess, here in the United States.
And I wouldn't have guessed it in the UK, Nick. I don't know how this came about.
Well, remember, the UK is not in the same position as the United States because they don't have the U.S. dollar as their currency. They don't have the Federal Reserve to back up an enormous government.
But they have an enormous government, Nick. They have a bigger police state than us in a lot of respects.
Right, they do, but that's why they're going bankrupt. So they actually have to start paying down their debt. They don't have as easy an option of monetizing it as the U.S. does.
Right. Well, let's let people know what's going on here.
All right, well, Chancellor George Osborne, who I guess is Chancellor of the Exchequer, which I think is basically like Secretary of the Treasury over there, has unveiled the biggest UK spending cut since World War II. With welfare councils, meaning local governments, and police budgets all hit. The pension age will rise sooner than expected, some incapacity benefits will be time limited, and other money clawed back through changes to tax credits will be, tax credits and housing benefits. And unfortunately, they are instituting new taxes here too, but that's because they're in a very, very deep financial hole. Altogether, it's a 19% average cut across departments. They point out what some departments have taken as far as cuts here, but some of the big ones, the Ministry of Defense, basically they're military, much like our Pentagon, only took an 8% hit, but higher education will be cut by 40%, flood defenses by 15%, sport funding for England and the UK will be cut by 30%. So these are drastic cuts. These are something that you do not see very often in US politics, and indeed I think it would be political suicide for most American politicians to actually start cutting government spending. They'll talk a big talk about it, but it's not terribly popular. There hasn't been a huge outcry in the UK. Labour, which is the opposition party there, is trying to make a stir about it, but even under Labour's plan, they were calling for a 20% cut. So Labour really trying to pick away at some of the details here, but it was generally agreed upon in the UK that they could not afford to continue the level of government they had.
Yeah, I would have preferred to see larger cuts in, say, the military than, say, education and flood defense of floods. It seems like
Yeah, I would agree, but you also have to remember that
it's important to kill brown people as well, I guess.
you do have to remember that they are cutting some things. I think they were saying 42,000 military personnel and civil servants will be laid off.
Yeah,
you do
8%.
You do have to. I know, but you do have to remember their defense spending is not as large a measure.
True,
as
but they're still involved in these foreign conflicts.
Yeah,
I mean, they could
a
easily
little.
cut it by at
The
least
UK is a
50%.
little bit less involved, but they still have troops on the ground in Afghanistan. They have pulled out of Iraq.
They're still murdering people in foreign lands.
And 500,000 public sector jobs in all will go. So 42,000 from the Ministry of Defense. The remainder, I presume, are being cut from other agencies, education, police forces. So they're actually doing broad-based cuts here. They're cutting government.
It's something that they've been forced into. The reason
too.
this happened is because they're forced into it. Just much like we've been talking, something's going to have to give here as well.
Right.
I mean, we've got this national deficit that's growing by, 10 to 20% every year. We've got these huge unfunded mandates coming around the bend. Social Security payments were up like 15%. Medicaid, the same thing. I mean, it's going to not be too far down the future until we have to do something similar as well.
It may actually be more drastic in the U.S. because I think the debt situation is going to get a lot worse here before it gets better.
Interesting, Nick. I was out of town this past week, and I actually had a chance to watch TV. I don't normally have TV at home, so I flipped on the news, and I was watching some of these headlines and the way that the big media reports on deficit spending going on in the U.S. And it was a little disturbing to me because the news headline read something like this. The deficit spending has been reduced by $100 billion this year, where the government actually spent way less money than it did, by $100 billion less deficit spending this year than that. And that was it. That's all they said. They went on to say they think it's because of higher taxes. There was more tax revenue coming in as well as a little bit less spending. But $100 billion less deficit. That's it. That's all they said. They didn't mention that.
It was still $3 trillion.
Right. And so it made it sound like the news story that we actually had a $100 billion surplus, when in fact it was a $1.2 trillion deficit or something.
Right. I mean, I think the total spending for fiscal year, we reported on this, I think it was last week, it was about $100 billion less than 2009.
But that's
it's
all they
still
reported
a huge deficit.
But the way we reported on it is the deficit was gigantic. It was over $1 trillion
Here's where the numbers
once
were
again.
a year ago.
But the big media, same story the big media covered, they just covered it by saying $100 billion less. And it's very deceiving.
Right. It's basically saying we're circling the drain a little more slowly than we had been a year ago.
But if you're a layperson who doesn't really pay attention to the news, doesn't really know what's going on with the deficit, I'd say probably the majority of Americans out there, it sounds like we had a surplus. That's what it sounds like when you just watch the big media stories. But anyways, I mean, like you said, Nick, I think it's this huge, massive debt wall is going to hit just as baby boomers are retiring. Something's going to have to give
that's a
here.
huge part of the debt, is the baby boomers retiring, Social Security, Medicare,
But we're going with huge amounts of debt without that even happening at this point. I mean, it's only begun. It's only a trickle before the whole dam breaks.
Right. Plus, with the new health care law, it's obvious already. If you're somebody who does receive health insurance through your work, you're probably, many places are opening their enrollment period right now, and you're probably realizing at most businesses you're going to have to be paying more out of pocket. We'll be talking about that later on. But
we've got a story about Boeing, I think.
All across the board, the promise was, this wouldn't reduce, even as they passed it, they were saying, this is not going to increase costs for the average person. Then a month or two later, they were saying, we kind of knew it was going to increase
hasn't even gone into
effect.
It's
going to be huge increases. It's basically going to make private insurance untenable and unprofitable. And my opinion is that it was essentially put into place so that they could cripple private insurance and get single payer eventually. That seems to be the game that's being played.
We'll see. We'll be reporting on that story and talking about that more in the second half of the show. But let's watch for it. It's important to pay attention to these other governments. While it's good news that they're doing it here, we could be making smaller cuts right now, and it would hurt less. Because now it's
or just making fewer increases.
There you go. That would be a good
actually cutting
start.
back the debt. As you said, $100 billion less in deficit spending this year over last.
It's still over $1 trillion deficit
What
spending.
if there had just been, $400 or $500 billion less? Because you're still looking at about $1 trillion.
Yeah.
So
But instead, they're actually
overall,
talking about more government bailouts and more stimulus. So we'll see. It's probably gonna hurt us way more because instead of 20%, when you go up that high, the higher you go, the farther you have to fall. And so you're going up like this. It's gonna be a big spike down. Hopefully not, but I don't see it any other way. I don't.
Yeah, we didn't have a Great Depression that followed World War II in the way that many parts of Europe did. I mean, the U.S. economy exploded, but I think what we're looking at is an economic situation that's potentially as bad as you can look at the Soviet breakup, what happened in the Soviet Union after the USSR collapsed, or what happened in Europe, post-war Western Europe, after the war was over. Because it's not as bad as having a war that blew up everything, but there is no real industrial base left in the United States. So if we go broke, we're in a pretty deep hole. It's not like we have a whole lot of infrastructure to start producing real wealth again anytime soon.
We'll have to see. Personally, I hope that it doesn't happen that way, Nick. Of course.
I'd rather it not.
I don't know what else to do.
It seems like
I don't see it any other way. I keep on telling myself, no, the economy's going to get better. We're going to pull out of this.
the closer and
really?
closer you get to the cliff before you crank the wheel, the less and less likely it gets that you're actually going to manage to turn in time. And I think we may have actually gotten past that point.
We'll
and
see.
we're still just hoping, and we're not. If anything, we're pushing the gas harder instead of cranking the wheel.
We'll continue to report on this, but we do need to talk about food, Nick. It's an important subject. The second half of tonight's show, we are going to be talking about some good news with food. But first, let's point out some of the depressing facts of the case. And the facts of the case are this. Governments and busybodies, nanny staters, whatever you want to call them, they want to regulate what you put in your body. And this doesn't stop with illicit drugs and substances, alcohol, whatever. This goes on to food as well, because some people know what's healthy better than you. And if they outlaw or ban certain foods, well, then you'll stop being fat, right? Or you'll have better cholesterol, or you'll live a healthier life, right? It just takes the government banning a food, and then you're suddenly going to turn your health around. Well, any sane person would say, no, that's foolish. People are going to, if they want to eat crap, they're going to eat crap, and just banning it from a restaurant's not going to make them healthy. But it's not stopping some people. We've reported on numerous stories in the U.S. where they're trying to ban certain fats and foods, and, well, it also happens in other parts of the world. This is coming from Toronto, Canada, America's hat, where Health Promotions Minister Margaret Best says the government may review KFC's new Double Down sandwich with an eye on banning it. At this point in time, I'm not looking at restricting it quite yet, but certainly I don't think you can ever close the door on anything, she said. The KFC website describes the Double Down as 2 thick and juicy slices of white meat, 2 slices of bacon, 2 slices of cheese, and of course, the special sauce. The original recipe version of the sandwich checks out at 540 calories and the grilled version at 460. You know, that's not all that bad. 540 calories in a sandwich?
It's not healthy, but
Nick, that's a snack for me. You should see the sandwiches I
look
make
at the
at
size
home.
of you. I mean,
I'm a large person. I don't want to even call myself all that fat, Nick. I need to eat a lot calories, and this to me, I'm like, to get a day's worth, I'm going to have to eat several of these.
I mean,
I had I think it's Wendy's where you get the Baconator. I had that for the first time. I had the double one, 980
Super
calories.
greasy.
I also had a side of fries, I had a Coke. My whole meal checked out at just under 2,000 calories. Felt like crap after I ate it, but man, it was delicious going down, Nick. And you know what? It's my choice to make because it's my body, and I say I want to fill my body with grease. Well, so be it. It was good. I liked it.
I think our Canadian viewers might take offense to being referred to as America's hat.
Why?
Are we Canada's underwear?
Sure. I don't know.
But it is. I mean, even in Canada, they have fast food restaurants. They have McDonald's.
Well, it's the same.
They don't have Dunkin' Donuts, I don't think.
Well, that's
Tim
a regional
Hortons or
thing.
whatever
It's going out slowly. I've noticed Dunkin' Donuts, the way it's a Northeast thing, and they spread out, but they spread out like in a pack. They don't like to spread out too thin. So I think they're going to take over the
well,
globe.
I think
in
there's
very
actually a
thick
business
numbers.
plan behind these kinds of things. But yeah, I mean, whatever. A lot of the chains are owned by the same company.
Well, I was driving across the country last week, and suddenly the first Dunkin' Donuts you see, you'll see 4 more within a mile, and then they're everywhere again. And then as you go out,
so they're like in pods.
they're like, yeah, they don't like
Clusters.
they want to be close. They're safety in numbers.
Interesting.
Or not. I don't know. It's just my observation.
But,
I haven't looked at their business
regardless
plan.
of the fast food chain, they have these chains in Canada,
Right,
just like in the U.S.
But
So,
Nick, I can go to the store. I can buy a bottle of oil or Crisco and just drink the thing, right? That's
Right.
not very good
Or
for
lard.
you. Or
You can
lard.
buy
I could
lard.
just eat the lard. Yum, yum, yum. Or I can buy a package of bacon and just shove the whole thing down my throat without even chewing it,
Right.
cooking it. But yet, they're going to ban KFC from making what I'm looking at not all that bad alternative
fast
to
food.
some of the other things that are probably on their menu. Chicken is it's not all that bad for you.
Yeah, I mean, fast food chicken.
Yeah, but Nick, 540 calories.
It's
Man,
not as bad as some menu items.
can I
no,
tell you,
mean,
the last time I had a meal that was less than 540 calories, that's enough to whet my appetite. If it's less than 540 calories, I said, don't even bother. I'm not even, how am you going to bed my appetite back down with just teasing it with 540 calories here? That's a joke. That's a joke meal, Nick, and they're planning on banning it.
Believe it or not, I like to eat big meals too.
I eat once a
You
day. I don't have
relative
time
now,
to eat in
but-
the day, Nick. I get up, I go to work,
Right.
I come here, I do class. I eat when I get home at like 10 o'clock at night, and I need to pack on about 3,000 calories, 4,000 calories. Otherwise, I'm not going to have the energy to go through the next day. And then these Canadians are trying to take away my right to put on an easy 540 calories. To me, I say, at this point in life, Nick, I'm one of those people who's like, how can I get the most calories for my buck? Because I don't
Right.
have much time to eat. I'm a very busy man right now. I work, I school, I show, I wife, I house tend, like yard work and stuff. Not much time for eating. And I need the best way to get calories into my body, and the
Right.
most delicious way as well. And that's, number one, bacon. Number two, special sauces. Chicken, I mean, I like chicken. It's not as caloric, I think, as a beef patty, but I guess that's harder to stick together without the
Bacon with
bread.
beef is pretty
My question is, if this had bread on it, would they say, okay, let's not think about banning it? It's just the thought. These people are just do-gooders. They saw a commercial on TV and they go, oh, here's a campaign to get behind. I mean, yeah, I want to make the world a better place, make people less fat and healthier people. Give me a break. People are going to do what they want to do. Someone who's willing to eat something that's made of meat and cheese and sauce and nothing good there isn't going to say, oh, it's banned. Well, I think I'll go with a salad with maybe just a little bit of vinaigrette dressing and a water. No, they're going to get the next fattest thing on the menu or make it themselves at home. Give me a break. You're not doing any good by trying to ban food. When we come back, though, Nick, in the second half of the show, we are talking about some great news. While Canadian, we're so wealthy and rich, we can ban fat foods.
Right.
Mexico, they're like, we made a 230-foot long sandwich. That's how cool we are. We'll be coming back with that story, also the healthcare news that we were discussing a little bit in the first half. When we come back, stay tuned. This is Free Minds TV.
Am I on? Am I on?
You're on.
Do I talk now? Do I talk now? I'm Gardner Goldsmith,
I
and
think she's up by where they're doing the show.
you're watching Free Minds TV. Open your mind, baby. Tell others to do the same.
And you're still watching Free Minds TV, and it's still Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Log on to our website, freemindstv.com. We've got the archives. We've got the radio show. We've got millions of hours of content. Well, really only thousands, but it's plenty. Probably more
really
than
are
any of you
thousands.
can watch. Really are thousands. There's also ways to donate money to the show if you like it. I wouldn't mind that. We're still in the red. You know, it's tough times, though. If you can't afford it, just enjoy the content for free. Up at freemindstv.com. All right, Nick. When we left, we were talking about America's Hat Canada banning food. We are going to get into America's Pants, Mexico, making huge food. But first, let's talk about healthcare. All this food talk. How are we going to stay healthy, Nick?
You get really fired up about food.
Well, food's it's important, Nick. And when I hear people trying to ban food, I'm like, oh, good God. This is
Yeah.
craziness. When
Well,
I hear people
another-
about making giant food, I'm like, yes.
Well, see, another thing that's important besides food, which is critically important, is healthcare. Healthcare is important because, well, most of us want to live relatively long lives as long as we can, and we want a higher quality of life. Healthcare is usually important for
Well,
that.
Nick, it's long life is good, but before we get into this, good
Quality
food
of
is
life.
good too. I mean, I would prefer to eat unhealthy sandwiches and die 10 years earlier than eat
10 years?
beans.
That's not big.
Okay, 20 years. I'd rather die 20 years earlier than have to eat beans and
Well, it's kind
tofu
of
my whole
it's kind
life.
of a personal economy of
Okay, well, I'm just
choices,
saying. I'm just
but
throwing that out there. Like, take the years off my life. Don't make me eat tofu.
there
and
is something to
beans.
be said for that. I mean,
Yeah. Quality over quantity.
these days people focus on how long.
That's what
how
they tell
many
me in
years can I
school.
squeeze out?
Well, my whole life, people have saying quality over quantity, Toby. Quality over quantity. Yet I grow up and they're like, as long as you live to be 100 and your life sucks, it's okay. That's the point, right? To live as long as possible, even if you're miserable and eating crap for food and wishing you died every day. As long as you live a long life. No. Quality is important too, Nick.
I'd agree. And the
Really,
same,
a balance would be best. But let's.
right.
All right, continue.
But quality in healthcare is good because it's one of those things, when you're talking about healthcare, high quality usually does mean longer life. So it's not really necessarily a choice between quality and quantity. Unfortunately, the government's decided to get involved, and that usually doesn't do anything good in terms of controlling costs. This news coming from Yahoo: aerospace giant Boeing is joining the list of companies that say the new healthcare law could have a potential downside for their workers. In a letter mailed to employees late last week, the company cited the overhaul as part of the reason is asking some 90,000 non-union workers to pay significantly more for a health plan next year. A copy of the letter, blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to get into all the specifics, but basically, Boeing is citing requirements that don't even kick in here for some time. I mean, there are some requirements that are going to increase costs today. As I mentioned earlier in the show, if you're somebody who does get health care through your employer, you're probably noticing that this upcoming year, you're going to be paying more out of pocket or more as a copay or have a higher deductible than you did this year because healthcare costs are going up for insurers and for you. Something that we were told was not going to happen by politicians, something that we on this show said, yeah, I have a feeling healthcare costs are going to go up once the government gets involved. In fact, they may go up more quickly than when the government was less involved. And I shouldn't say once the government got involved because even prior to this national healthcare legislation, about 50 cents of every healthcare dollar was spent on by the government. So you're looking at a system that was halfway socialized beforehand, and we're moving towards mostly government control with some private insurance left. But all the government regulations are going to make that less and less viable as a business model, and I wouldn't be surprised if in 10 or 20 years we don't have private insurance at all.
No. I mean, we talked about last week about how it does take a long time for health insurance to kick in, this government health insurance, to see what all the ramifications of a bill like this are going to take place. We don't even know what's in it. I mean, the Speaker of the House even said we had to pass it to see what's in it, which is, we talked about last week, completely asinine. Talking about in Greece, it was like 30 years ago they passed a similar bill, and now they're going to be chopping off people's legs because their diabetic boots are too expensive. Okay. If you want the details on that, yeah, it did sound pretty crazy, but it's a real story. Check out last week's episode 178,
I mean, when you think about it, it's an absurd statement to say we need to pass a law before we can know what's in it.
Yeah, and now
it'd be like saying we need to buy the house before we take a look at it.
Yeah, well, how else are you going to get inside?
All right. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Well,
it's ridiculous. Somebody, an elected official who makes a statement like that should be kicked out of office at the next opportunity and should never hold a post higher than dog catcher ever again. I don't even think I wouldn't even trust a dog catcher who says something that asinine. Yeah, he might do something crazy with the dog.
Got to shoot the dog to see if it's rabid, right?
right. I mean, just ridiculous.
Off with his head, send it to the
lab.
But
this is gonna have real consequences for people, working people. A lot of people, I mean, you're somewhat lucky if you do get health care somewhat covered by your employer, but at a time when wages are flat or falling, there's not a whole lot of growth in terms of jobs. So a lot of people are feeling the pain already. Everyday expenses, things like food and fuel, they're certainly not going down. In fact, they seem to be going up.
Wait, but Nick, the government told us there's zero inflation last year, though. Zero. That's I just saw the numbers. They didn't raise Social Security benefits for the second year in a row because there's no inflation.
Yeah, that's what they said.
Did your prices stay the same? Because I know mine went way up. My pay went down, but my bills went up.
Right. I think that happened for just about everybody because when you hear the government inflation rate calculated, they're excluding even the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. They exclude things like food and fuel, and then there's what they call hedonics, where they actually change things. So they're comparing what, I don't know, a steak 5 years ago cost compared to a hamburger now, because people don't eat steak anymore. They eat hamburgers. But of course, they're comparing steaks and hamburgers or apples and oranges. They're not actually telling you how much the price of a steak has inflated over 5 years. They intentionally pick a different product and say, this is a substitute now. And that's done all the time.
If you look into it, it's laughable. I don't even know why they put
They
it
make
out
up
there.
a number.
I
They
guess
the number
they put it out
say
there
something
because
between 0 and 2%.
most people lap it up. They lap it right up. Once again, one of the tickers. When I was watching a little bit of news, some of the headlines, one of the stories was that there was no inflation. And I'm like, well, they didn't even mention the fact that the news anchor there that was reporting, we're news commentary, by the way. We don't report on the news, we commentate on it. Is that why they couldn't say, wait a minute, no inflation. My bills went way up.
You're right. And I mean,
how can someone sit there and report on the news and say, there was no inflation for the second year in a row with a straight face and not be like, it's some kind of cognitive dissonance. Their prices went up, Nick. They know that their bills went up.
Yeah, well, they got to keep saying what's on their paper, or they're not going to get paid.
Oh, man, it's infuriating, Nick.
Yeah, it is. But, I mean, it's one of those things where, obviously, the monetary base has drastically expanded. Consumer prices have gone up. Some people say, well, we're seeing deflation with things like derivatives and all this, really, from the perspective of a normal person, all this Wall Street crap that doesn't really matter. In real terms, I think what we're seeing is definitely inflation. It hasn't kicked into high gear because there are some drivers like derivatives and things like that unwinding. So there is some market-based deflation offsetting it for now. But we're seeing the Fed print more and more money.
Yeah, and I'm seeing my bill. That's the only thing that matters to me, Nick, are my bills. Are they going down or are they going up? And they're all going up. Anyways, Nick, we do need to move on to some good news, but it's a little bit bad news in a sense. The good news is another world record has taken place on food. Yes, bigger and bigger food being created every day, and Free Minds TV brings it to you. The bad news is, though, Mexico is taking not the United States. I guess it's still America. That's kind of good news, but
the other America.
It's the other America, America's pants, if you will. Mexico. A brown America. That wasn't me. That was him, the man in the booth. The good people of Iztapalapa cooked up a 230-foot-long, almost 1.5-ton enchilada, which is now an official Guinness record. The massive concoction was made of corn tortillas, white onions, green tomatoes, serrano chilies, avocado, cheese, cream, and a sea of salsa. Yes, Nick, I think that this is great. Great news. The only thing that could make this better is if it happened right here in the good old US of A. But you know what? This is just more competition for bigger and bigger food. I say, put it out there, Nick.
But when you think about it, an enchilada is sort of a traditional dish.
Sure.
Wouldn't it make sense for America to go for the largest hamburger?
Nick, I think America should go for the largest everything. We do have the largest hamburger thing.
It seems to be an American
We reported
tradition.
on that. Oh, no, Australia took it from us.
No, Australia took it.
I remember saying, we've got to bring this back. America, if there's one thing we need to set the prize on, it's bringing back the biggest hamburger. Okay, I'll concede to your point, Nick. We'll let Mexico keep their big enchilada. But someone has got to bring back the hamburger. And if it's nobody else, it's going to be me. That's my life mission and goal. That's going to do it for us. Different opinions. You have a different life mission or goal than making big food. Bringing back the Guinness Book of World Record. We'd love to hear it. fmtv@freemindsmedia.org is the email address, or just log on to our website, freemindsmedia.org, freemindstv.com, however you want to get there. Up there, you can contact us, donate us money, check out the archives of the radio show. Until next week, it's been Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Have a good one.